There we go. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, excellent. So I think the community track's always great because we're going to go from national level stuff happening in England about child health, which is about the biggest scale you can look at, right the way down to what's going to be, at its very core, really small scale piece of work. So we're looking at just talking about a piece of work we did about using open source components to create a FHIR-aware template engine, initially for our own use, but one that's been shared out, so it's available for anybody else in the FHIR community to use. Whilst the topic is about about JavaScript, open source, it's worth trying to take away the idea that actually there's a big productivity gain in pulling components together and putting a bit of effort into making platforms FHIR-aware. So even if you're not keen on JavaScript, it's not your preferred language, there's still a take-home message there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk it through pretty much looking at some code that we'd written a long time ago. This isn't the real code, it's just an example of a pattern. And what we found was, through doing code reviews, we had a repeated pattern where we would be taking a FHIR resource and we would want to render that FHIR resource into another format. Formats included HTML, CSV files, sometimes transformations into other responses on the wire. And we'd done it quite a lot, and we started FHIR very, very early, so there were no tools and frameworks out there to help us. And looking back at our code, we often had examples very similar to this, where we would go and fetch resources in. We'd have pieces of bespoke code, which went into the internals of the FHIR resource, pulling out particular data items, and then we were finding ways to render them and put them back out onto the wire. In this case, saving everything as a file. Clearly, that's not our best bit of code we'd ever written. It works fine when it's one page long, but it's completely unmaintainable. It means that every time anything changes, we have to go and redeploy our code, even if just somebody wants a little tweak into the output format or change in the HTML. It was clearly not a good way to be going. So we looked out at how we could systematically go through our libraries and refactor that code in a more effective way. And we started out by looking at tools that were available in the community already. The first tool that we looked at was solving the problem of how we access the data. So how many people are using FHIRPath at the moment within applications? Yeah, small number of hands there. It's something that wasn't initially in the FHIR spec, but it is a really, really useful capability. So what FHIRPath is, it says, it's navigation extraction language, which allows you to go and pull out particular data items from within a FHIR resource. It was originally written to support invariants in the FHIR specification, which is why there's parallels to XPath, but it's not just for that. If you've got a resource, you need to get particular data items out of it, it's a great tool, and there are libraries available. So we use JavaScript. There's now, there is a library available on NPM. Go and download it. You can start using FHIRPath expressions straight away. I believe there are similar libraries available if you're a C# developer, .NET developer, or Java developer as well. So we were able to pull in FHIRPath as our first module. The second concern was that we were doing a lot of work building resources, HTML strings, FHIR resources, files in code. And that wasn't an effective way to do it. So we had a look around and we found that within the web development community, there's quite a lot of template libraries which allow you to take a data object and then using a template, populate items within the template from that data object. The one we chose to use was called Handlebars. So if you look at the example here, there's a little fragment of HTML, and where it's got these double curly braces, it will populate at runtime. It will render the data into the title and the body sections of that fragment. So we no longer have to do that within code. We can actually take out our template as a file. So we look at what we got from our first refactoring. We were able to split out the two concerns, so we could read a resource and create this data object that we needed, and that's all now using FHIRPath to access the data items we need. And then, rather than building an output in code, we were able to build that using our Handlebars template engine. So the bottom section is the template that's actually just loaded. So we've separated out the template from our code. And you can see that again, it's got the curly braces in. One nice feature that we like Handlebars is it allows us to put in extra capabilities and insert them. So in this case, it didn't have a native uppercase function, but we wanted it for our output. So we were able to add in, extend that library itself. So I've got a quick demo of that. We're working from a patient that we've, and that's no good, is it? That keynote is completely taken over. Right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip the demos. We'll do one demo at the end. So what we found was that we could do this effectively, but we still here have got XPath in our code. We want to be able to move that out. What we identified was that because we can extend Handlebars, we've actually got all the bits we need. We've got Handlebars providing us with a template engine. We've got FHIRPath, which helps us select the data items we wanted, but we needed to be able to pull them together into one. So we created our own library, which mimics a whole bunch of the functions that already exist within within Handlebars. So the first one we did was we effectively cloned the if function, which does conditional logic. So now we've got a block, what's called a block helper. What this is saying is if the FHIR resource that we're trying to render has got a patient address where the use is temp, so the standard codes, then we'll put in this paragraph into our output. So it's conditional logic, and that also includes evaluation of the condition not where if you don't match, so you can actually have an else section in there as well. It's relatively simple, but moving the logic into the template itself. We then were able to work through the list, particularly the block helpers within Mustache. So we produced an unless block helper, which allows us to put in, to render a piece of text or some content if a data item doesn't exist within the resource. So in this case, we suggested that you might be able to actually put in a button which captures a temporary address if one hasn't already been captured. We took the each helper, which allows you to iterate through a number of items in an array or collection and output. So again, if you had a patient address in FHIR, that's a collection. You may have a number of addresses. You can actually produce a paragraph of output, a piece of output for every single one of those addresses. And also, just to simplify, we put in a with FHIR function. So if you evaluate if the FHIRPath expression evaluates, then everything else within that block can be done within the context of the resource that you've got back. So that allows you to simplify a lot of your code, so you can have much shorter expressions. And finally, we had to add one capability that wasn't just a straightforward port of existing capability in the template engine, and that was to be able to resolve a FHIR reference. Simple resources are easy, but if you're looking at bundles or you've got contained resources, what you'll find is you may have a patient who has a managing organization, but the managing organization is actually somewhere else in a bundle or is a contained resource, and you want to provide that piece of information. So if you've got a patient managing organization, rather than just displaying a reference, which might well be a URL, what we've done is we've provided a resolve capability. Effectively, that mirrors the resolve capability is within the FHIRPath specification, but isn't implemented in the FHIRPath library we've got access to. And what that will do is that will go and will actually dereference the resource, so that when this paragraph within the block can actually be populated with values from the managing organization resource. That's an organization resource. It only works with internal references. We're not going off trying to fetch things from remote servers, but it helps immensely with bundles. So if you've got a document bundle that you might want to render, those are tied together by internal references inside the bundle. And also, in many cases, we're seeing people using contained resources to have nice packages of data to be shared, so it works well for those. So what we've done is we've taken the FHIRPath library that we had access to, the template library that we had access to, Handlebars, put the two together, and bundled that up now. So it's all been published now. So it's on GitHub source code, and it's available as an NPM package. So if anybody else wants to take that and download it and use it, find all the faults in it and improve it, feel free. That's good. So if we now look at using that with our second stage of refactoring, we can see that we've now been able to eradicate all of our template and all of our XPath and selection of data from our source code. Everything now resides inside the template. So we've moved it all out into metadata. The implications for us are that actually deploying new code is a relatively expensive operation. That's something that we do on a routine basis, but it carries more risk. We've got to make sure our regressions tests work. Deploying a new set of metadata, a new transform, is relatively easy. So we've simplified our code, so that's much, much more maintainable than it was, and we can now deploy new transformations very, very quickly using that. Having done it, what we've discovered is that we use those transformations in all sorts of places. And so one of the interesting examples is that the NHS is very sophisticated in England in some areas. In other areas, they still like faxes. So we still have demand from our users that they want us to be able to actually print things out so that they can put them in the post or fax them to people. You know, you'd think it was 21st century, but not always. And we were looking at our PDF library that we use. So we use a library called PDF Make, which helps us render information and create PDF documents. What we realized was that that library actually is reliant on a JSON definition of the file, of the output. We can now use our template engine combined with FHIRPath to create a complete definition of what the PDF document has to look like and run it all in 6 lines of code. So if somebody comes along with a new format, it's very easy for us to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and close down Keynote. No, that really doesn't want to play, does it? Now, I've got some lovely demos. What I will do is we'll package them up and we'll put them up on GitHub so you can play with them. But if anybody wants to come and see them, come and see me afterwards. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I just checked your requirements for license is 7 GPL. Any chance to switch to MIT so it's safer for us?
Yeah, probably. Come talk to me afterwards, explain why, but almost certainly, yeah. Any other questions? No? Excellent. Well, thanks very much for your time. Cheers.